The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Willowbrook as 17-year-old Sarah Mackenzie stood defiantly in front of the general store, her wild auburn hair catching the light like flames. The townspeople had gathered in small clusters, whispering among themselves about the latest scandal involving the Mackenzie girl. "That child is beyond redemption," Mrs. Henderson muttered to her companion, adjusting her bonnet with disapproval. "Yesterday she was seen racing her horse bareback through the cemetery, disturbing the peace of the dead." Sarah's emerald eyes flashed with rebellion as she overheard the comment. She had grown tired of the constant criticism from the good people of Willowbrook, a small frontier town nestled in the Montana Territory during the summer of 1876. Her father, Judge Robert Mackenzie, was one of the most respected men in the territory, but his daughter had become the source of endless gossip and concern. The trouble had started when Sarah was just 14. While other girls her age were learning proper etiquette and domestic skills, Sarah preferred climbing trees, swimming in the creek with her clothes on, and learning to shoot from Old Pete, the retired cavalry sergeant who worked at her father's ranch. Her mother had died when Sarah was 12, leaving behind a daughter who refused to be molded into society's expectations. "Sarah Elizabeth Mackenzie," her father's voice boomed from across the street. Judge Mackenzie approached with his usual stern expression, his black coat and hat marking his authority in the small community. "What have you done now?" "Nothing that wasn't my right to do, Father," Sarah replied, lifting her chin defiantly. She wore riding pants instead of a proper dress, another source of scandal among the local women. "I was merely exercising thunder." He needed a good run. Through the cemetery? At full gallop? While whooping like a... Judge Mackenzie paused, aware of the listening crowd. "We will discuss this at home." As father and daughter walked toward their buggy, neither noticed the tall figure watching from the shadows near the blacksmith shop. Joseph Crow Feather had been observing the scene with quiet interest. A Cherokee tracker in his late 20s, he possessed the keen instincts that made him invaluable to law enforcement across the territory. His dark eyes studied the spirited young woman with an expression that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Joseph had arrived in Willowbrook 3 days earlier, hired by Judge Mackenzie to track down a gang of cattle rustlers who had been plaguing local ranchers. His reputation preceded him, men spoke in hushed tones about his ability to follow trails that others couldn't even see, and his skill with both rifle and knife was legendary among those who knew him. The Cherokee tracker was not like other men who came through Willowbrook. He moved with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in the wilderness, and his presence commanded respect without demanding it. His shoulder-length black hair was usually tied back with a leather cord, and he dressed in a practical combination of buckskin and cotton that allowed him freedom of movement while maintaining durability in harsh conditions. That afternoon, Joseph met with Judge Mackenzie in the man's study, a room lined with law books and territorial documents. Maps covered one wall, marking the various ranches and settlements throughout the region. "The rustlers struck again last night," Judge Mackenzie explained, pointing to a location on the largest map. "The Patterson Ranch lost 30 head of cattle. That makes over 200 stolen in the past month." Joseph studied the marked locations with professional interest. "The pattern suggests they are moving the cattle through the mountain passes toward the Canadian border. I will need to examine the tracks at the Patterson Ranch before the trail grows cold." "Of course. I have prepared provisions and arranged for you to use one of my best horses." Judge Mackenzie hesitated before continuing. "There is another matter I wish to discuss with you, Mr. Crow Feather. It concerns my daughter." Joseph remained silent, waiting for the judge to elaborate. "Sarah is challenging. Since her mother's death, she has become increasingly difficult to manage. The townspeople consider her behavior scandalous, and I fear for her future. No decent man will consider marrying a woman with such a reputation." "What does this have to do with me, Judge Mackenzie?" "I have heard about Cherokee customs regarding the raising of spirited children. Your people understand that some individuals require different approaches than conventional society provides." Judge Mackenzie leaned forward in his chair. "I am willing to pay you handsomely if you would consider taking Sarah as your responsibility. Teach her discipline, respect, the skills she needs to survive in this harsh land." Joseph's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his dark eyes.
You wish to give your daughter to a stranger? Not give, entrust. She needs guidance that I cannot provide.
Perhaps someone who understands the wild places, who knows how to channel that energy into something productive.
Before Joseph could respond, the study door burst open.
Sarah Mackenzie stood in the doorway, her face flushed with anger and her green eyes blazing. "I heard every word," she declared, striding into the room without invitation.
"Father, how dare you discuss me as if I were livestock to be traded?"
"Sarah, you were not invited into this conversation," Judge Mackenzie began sternly.
"This conversation concerns my entire future. I will not be handed over to some stranger like a piece of property."
She turned to face Joseph directly, meeting his gaze without flinching.
"And you, sir, what kind of man accepts such an arrangement? Do you truly believe you could tame what others consider too wild?" Joseph studied the young woman before him.
He saw the fire in her spirit, the intelligence behind her anger, and the deep pain she carried from losing her mother. Most men would have been intimidated by her directness, but Joseph recognized something familiar in her defiance. "I do not seek to tame anyone, Miss Mackenzie," he replied calmly.
"Taming breaks the spirit. Training develops it." Sarah was momentarily taken aback by his response.
She had expected either dismissal or condescension, not this measured consideration of her worth. "Your father speaks of Cherokee customs," Joseph continued, rising from his chair. "Among my people, when a young person shows exceptional spirit, they are often guided by someone who understands that spirit. Not to break it, but to help it find its proper direction."
"And you believe my spirit needs direction?" Sarah challenged. "I believe your spirit needs understanding.
Whether that understanding comes from me or another is not for me to decide alone." Judge Mackenzie watched this exchange with growing hope. For the first time in years, someone was speaking to his daughter as an equal rather than a problem to be solved.
"What would such an arrangement involve?"
Sarah asked, her tone becoming less confrontational. "First, you would need to agree to it willingly.
No person can truly learn from someone they resent.
Second, you would learn skills that most women in your society are not taught: tracking, hunting, survival in the wilderness, reading the signs that nature provides. Third, you would learn discipline not through punishment, but through understanding consequences.
And, in return?
You would assist me in my work when appropriate.
Your knowledge of this territory and its people could be valuable in tracking the cattle rustlers." Sarah's eyes widened with surprise.
No one had ever suggested that her knowledge might be valuable, that her familiarity with every trail and hiding place in the surrounding mountains could serve a practical purpose.
"You would teach me to track?" "Among other things. But, first, I must complete my current assignment.
The rustlers must be dealt with before any other arrangements can be considered."
Judge Mackenzie cleared his throat. "Perhaps Sarah could assist you in gathering information about the rustlers.
She knows this territory better than anyone, and the local ranchers trust her."
"Father!"
Sarah exclaimed, shocked that he would suggest such a thing. "You wanted to be useful, my dear. This might be your opportunity to prove that your unconventional knowledge has value."
Joseph considered the proposal.
Having a local guide who knew the terrain intimately could indeed be helpful, and working together would allow him to evaluate whether the judge's proposal had merit.
"Very well.
Miss Mackenzie may assist me in gathering information about the rustling activities. But," he looked directly at Sarah, "you will follow my instructions without question when we are tracking."
In the wilderness, hesitation or argument can mean the difference between life and death.
Sarah felt a thrill of excitement mixed with apprehension. Finally, someone was offering her the chance to do something meaningful, something that used her knowledge and skills rather than dismissing them as unladylike. "When do we begin?" she asked.
"Tomorrow at dawn. Meet me at the Patterson Ranch. Wear practical clothing and bring your horse.
We will examine the site where the cattle were stolen and begin following their trail."
As Joseph prepared to leave the study, Sarah called out to him. "Mr. Crowfeather, why are you considering my father's proposal?" Surely you have better things to do than deal with a woman the entire territory considers too wild to civilize.
Joseph paused at the doorway and looked back at her. Miss Mackenzie, I have spent my life in wild places, and I have learned that the most beautiful and valuable things in nature are often those that others consider too dangerous to approach. The mountain lion is wild, but it is also magnificent. The eagle soars free, but it also serves its purpose in the great balance of life. He left Sarah standing in the study, her heart racing with emotions she couldn't quite name. For the first time in her life, someone had compared her wildness to something magnificent rather than shameful. That evening, Sarah sat by her bedroom window, looking out at the stars that sparkled above the Montana landscape. Tomorrow would bring her first real adventure, her first chance to prove that her unconventional skills had value beyond shocking the good people of Willowbrook. She thought about Joseph Crowfeather's words, about the difference between taming and training, about finding direction for her spirit rather than breaking it. Perhaps this Cherokee tracker understood something that others had missed, that her wildness was not a flaw to be corrected, but a strength to be channeled. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah dreamed of mountain paths and hidden trails, of tracking mysterious rustlers through rugged terrain, and of a man with dark eyes who saw potential where others saw only problems. Tomorrow, her real education would begin. Dawn came early to the Montana Territory, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold as Sarah Mackenzie rode toward the Patterson Ranch. She had barely slept, her mind racing with anticipation and nervous energy. True to her word, she wore practical clothing, leather riding pants, a cotton shirt, and sturdy boots. Her auburn hair was braided and pinned securely to keep it out of her way during the day's work. Joseph Crowfeather was already waiting when she arrived, standing beside a magnificent black stallion that seemed as alert and ready as its master. He studied Sarah's appearance with approval. She had listened to his instructions about practical dress. "You are punctual, Miss Mackenzie. That is the first requirement of a good tracker." "What are the others?" Sarah asked as she dismounted Thunder, her spirited bay gelding. "Patience, observation, and the ability to think like your quarry. We will see how well you possess these qualities." The Patterson Ranch showed clear signs of the recent raid. Broken fence rails lay scattered on the ground, and the earth was churned up where cattle had been driven hastily from their pasture. Mr. Patterson, a weathered man in his 50s, met them near the damaged enclosure. "They hit us around midnight," he explained, his voice tight with anger. "Took 30 of my best breeding stock. These weren't ordinary cattle thieves, they knew exactly what they were after and how to get it." Joseph knelt beside the fence line, studying the ground with intense concentration. Sarah watched, fascinated, as his fingers traced patterns in the dirt that looked like random scuffs to her untrained eye. 6 riders, Joseph announced after several minutes of examination. 2 on horseback holding the cattle, 4 on foot cutting the fence and selecting specific animals. "They have done this before, many times." "How can you tell all that from marks in the dirt?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "Come here. Kneel beside me and look closely." Sarah did as instructed, finding herself mere inches from the Cherokee tracker as he pointed out details in the disturbed earth. "See here, the depth and spacing of these hoof prints tells us about the horse's size and gait. This mark shows where a rider dismounted quickly, putting more pressure on his left foot than his right. That suggests he favors his right leg, possibly from an old injury." Sarah began to see patterns she had missed before. "And these marks near the fence?" "Boot prints from the men who worked on foot. Different sizes, different wear patterns. One man drags his left heel slightly, you can see the scuff marks. Another has a nail or metal piece in his right sole that leaves a distinctive mark." "This is remarkable," Sarah breathed, caught up in the detective work. "It's like reading a story written in the earth." "Exactly. The land tells us everything if we know how to listen." They followed the trail away from the ranch, Joseph teaching Sarah to read the signs as they rode. He showed her how to determine the age of tracks by the way grass bent and recovered, how to judge the condition of stolen cattle by the depth and spacing of their hoofprints, and how to estimate the rustler's speed and direction. "Why did they head northeast instead of straight north toward Canada?" Sarah asked as they paused to rest their horses near a small creek.
You tell me. You know this territory.
Sarah considered the question, drawing on her years of exploring the Montana landscape. The northeast route takes them through Devil's Canyon. It's rough terrain, but there's an old mining trail that winds through the mountains. If they know that trail, they could move cattle through areas where larger parties couldn't follow.
And, after Devil's Canyon?
The trail connects to the Mackenzie Pass, which leads directly to the Canadian border. It's isolated but passable for those who know the way.
Sarah's eyes widened with realization.
These rustlers aren't outsiders. They know our local trails too well.
Very good.
What else does that tell you?
Sarah thought carefully before answering. Someone local is either involved or providing information.
The rustlers knew exactly which cattle to take from the Patterson Ranch, and they knew the terrain well enough to plan an escape route that avoids the main roads.
Joseph nodded with approval.
You have good instincts, Miss Mackenzie. Now we must determine who in Willowbrook or the surrounding ranches might have such knowledge and motivation. As they continued tracking, Sarah found herself drawn into the work with growing enthusiasm. For the first time in her life, someone was teaching her skills that felt natural and important. Joseph's teaching style was unlike anything she had experienced. He asked questions that made her think rather than simply lecturing, and he treated her observations with respect.
Mr. Crowfeather, she said during another rest stop, why did you agree to consider my father's proposal?
Surely you have better things to do than teach an unruly frontier girl.
Joseph was quiet for a long moment, watching an eagle circle overhead.
I see something in you that others miss, Miss Mackenzie. Your spirit is strong, but it has been wounded by people who fear what they do not understand.
What do you mean?
In Cherokee tradition, we believe that some people are born with spirits that require wide spaces and great challenges.
When such spirits are forced into small spaces, they become destructive.
But, when they are given proper channels, they become forces for good. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at his words. No one had ever suggested that her restless energy and need for adventure might be something positive rather than shameful.
You really believe that?
I believe that you have been trying to tell the world who you are, but no one has been listening. Your wildness is not rebellion, it is a calling that has not yet found its purpose. They made camp that evening in a protected valley, following the cattle trail that led steadily toward the mountains. Joseph demonstrated how to build a nearly smokeless fire and prepare a meal using only what the wilderness provided. Sarah watched, absorbed, as he identified edible plants and explained how to find water in seemingly dry terrain. Among my people, both men and women learn these skills, he explained as they shared a simple supper. Survival does not recognize the artificial boundaries that your society places on what men and women should know.
Is that why you were willing to teach me? Because Cherokee women learn things that white women are forbidden to know?
Partly. But also because I recognize a kindred spirit.
I, too, was considered too wild for the expectations placed upon me. Sarah looked at him with surprise.
You? But you seem so controlled, so disciplined.
Now I do.
But, as a young man, I was angry at the world that had taken my people's lands and tried to force us to live like white men. I fought against everything and everyone, including those who tried to help me.
What changed? An elder named Many Horses took me into the mountains for an entire winter. He taught me that my anger could either destroy me or become a tool for protecting what I valued. He showed me how to channel my wild spirit into something useful. And, now you think you can do the same for me? Joseph looked at her across their small fire, his dark eyes reflecting the flames.
I think you can do it for yourself, with proper guidance. The question is whether you truly want to learn, or whether you prefer the comfortable role of the rebellious daughter. Sarah bristled at his words.
Comfortable? There's nothing comfortable about being the scandal of an entire town. Isn't there?
As long as you remain the wild girl who shocks the proper ladies, you never have to discover what you might truly become.
Rebellion is easy, Miss Mackenzie.
Purpose is much more difficult. His challenge hit home, and Sarah spent much of that night staring at the stars and considering his words. She had grown so accustomed to defining herself in opposition to others' expectations that she had never seriously considered what she actually wanted to become.
The next morning brought an important discovery. Joseph found evidence that the rustlers had met with another group at a predetermined location near the base of Devil's Canyon.
Fresh horse tracks and the remains of a cold campfire told the story of a planned rendezvous.
They are more organized than we initially believed, Joseph observed, examining the site carefully. This is not simply a gang of opportunistic thieves. Someone is coordinating multiple groups to steal cattle from different ranches simultaneously.
Sarah studied the tracks with her newly trained eye.
There are at least 12 horses represented here, maybe more.
And, look, some of these tracks are from shod horses, but others are unshod.
Some of the rustlers are Indians. What makes you think that?
The unshod horses, and the way some of these riders dismount and remount.
Father always said that Indian riders have different habits than white men, based on how they learn to handle horses. Joseph was impressed by her observation.
Very good.
Yes, this appears to be a mixed group.
That explains how they know both the white settlers' patterns and the hidden mountain trails. As they prepared to follow the trail into the treacherous terrain of Devil's Canyon, Joseph turned to Sarah with a serious expression.
From this point forward, we may encounter real danger.
The rustlers will have sentries posted, and they will not hesitate to shoot anyone who threatens their operation.
Are you certain you wish to continue? Sarah looked at the narrow canyon entrance, then back at Joseph's concerned face.
Mr. Crowfeather, I have spent 17 years being told that I should stay safe, stay quiet, stay proper. For the first time in my life, I have the chance to do something that matters.
I'm not turning back now. Joseph nodded slowly. Very well.
But you must promise to follow my instructions exactly. In the canyon, one mistake could cost both our lives.
I promise.
As they rode into the shadows of Devil's Canyon, Sarah felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration unlike anything she had ever experienced. Behind them lay the safe, predictable world of Willowbrook where she was known as the Wild Mackenzie Girl. Ahead lay unknown dangers and the possibility of proving herself in ways she had never imagined. The canyon walls rose steeply on both sides, creating a natural corridor that would be easy to defend but difficult to escape. The cattle trail was clear here, marked by fresh droppings and disturbed vegetation. Joseph moved with increased caution, frequently stopping to listen for sounds that might indicate trouble ahead.
How much farther do you think? Sarah whispered during one of their stops.
The trail suggests they are moving the cattle through the canyon to reach the high pastures beyond. If I remember the geography correctly, there is a hidden valley about 2 miles ahead where they could hold the stolen stock while planning their route to Canada.
Hidden Valley?
Your territory has many such places, areas that cannot be seen from the main trails but provide shelter and grazing. The rustlers clearly know this land very well. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of distant cattle lowing echoed through the canyon. Joseph immediately signaled for silence, and they dismounted to proceed on foot, leaving their horses hidden behind a screen of boulders. Moving with the stealth that had made him legendary, Joseph led Sarah up a narrow ledge that provided a view of the valley beyond. What they saw there would change everything about their understanding of the rustling operation, and place them in danger greater than either had anticipated. The hidden valley spread below them like a natural amphitheater, surrounded by towering canyon walls that concealed it from casual observation. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she took in the scope of what lay before them. This was no simple cattle rustling operation, it was a massive criminal enterprise. More than 300 cattle grazed in the valley, far more than could have been stolen from local ranches alone. Temporary corrals had been constructed to separate different herds, and several permanent structures suggested this location had been in use for months, possibly years. Joseph counted at least 20 men moving among the cattle and around a cluster of buildings at the valley's center. Some wore typical frontier clothing, but others dressed in the traditional garments of various Indian tribes. This was indeed the mixed group they had suspected, but its size and organization exceeded their worst fears. "My God," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "They've been stealing cattle from across the entire territory." Joseph studied the layout with professional interest.
See how they have organized the operation.
Those corrals closest to the entrance hold fresh cattle, probably including the Patterson stock. The herds farther back appear to be better established, suggesting a rotation system.
What kind of rotation system?
They bring stolen cattle here to rest and recover from the stress of being driven from their home ranges. Once the animals have adjusted and any pursuit has died down, they move them north to Canada for sale. It's a sophisticated operation that requires significant planning and coordination. Sarah pointed to a large building near the center of the camp.
That looks like a bunkhouse. And there, do you see that corral with the different horses?
Those animals are too fine to belong to common rustlers.
Joseph followed her gaze and nodded grimly. You are right.
Those are expensive horses, well cared for and obviously valuable.
This operation has financial backing from someone with considerable resources.
As they watched, a familiar figure emerged from the largest building and began giving orders to the men in the valley.
Sarah gasped in shock, recognizing the man immediately. That's James Morrison, she breathed. He owns the biggest ranch in the territory. Father considers him a close friend and trusted ally. Are you certain? Absolutely certain. I've known him since childhood.
He's been to dinner at our house dozens of times, and he always presents himself as the most respectable rancher in Montana Territory.
Joseph absorbed this information with growing concern.
Morrison's involvement explained many things about the rustling operation. His legitimate business provided perfect cover for moving stolen cattle, his social position gave him access to information about his neighbors' herds, and his wealth could fund the extensive organization they were witnessing. We need to get closer, Joseph decided. I must gather enough evidence to convince your father and the territorial authorities.
Morrison's reputation will make our accusations difficult to believe without solid proof.
They spent the next hour carefully working their way down into the valley, using natural cover and Joseph's tracking skills to avoid detection. Sarah found herself completely absorbed in the stealth required, her body moving instinctively in response to Joseph's silent signals. Hidden behind a cluster of boulders near the main camp, they could hear conversations that confirmed their suspicions. Morrison was indeed in charge, coordinating with both white and Indian partners to steal cattle from across Montana Territory and drive them north for sale in Canada. The Patterson raid went exactly as planned, Morrison was saying to a group of his subordinates. 30 head of prime breeding stock, taken without a shot being fired. Judge Mackenzie's daughter provided excellent intelligence about the ranch's security arrangements. Sarah's blood ran cold at these words. Morrison was claiming that she had provided information for the raid on the Patterson ranch. The accusation was false, but she realized how her extensive knowledge of local ranches and her reputation for unconventional behavior could be twisted to make her appear guilty. Joseph saw her distress and placed a calming hand on her shoulder. He understood immediately that Morrison was not only stealing cattle but also setting up Sarah as a scapegoat for his crimes. Her wild reputation would make the accusations believable to many people. We need to leave immediately, Joseph whispered. Morrison is planning to frame you for these thefts. Once we return to Willowbrook, you will be arrested unless we can prove your innocence. How can we prove something that isn't true? By exposing the real criminals. But, first, we must get you to safety. As they began to retreat from their hiding place, disaster struck. A loose stone shifted under Sarah's foot, clattering down the slope and alerting the sentries to their presence. Within moments, shouts rang out across the valley as armed men began searching for the intruders. Run, Joseph commanded, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her toward the canyon entrance where they had left their horses. They raced through the undergrowth as bullets whistled overhead, the rustlers closing in from multiple directions. Joseph's knowledge of wilderness movement kept them ahead of their pursuers, but both knew they were in deadly peril. Reaching their horses, they mounted quickly and spurred their animals toward the canyon exit. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder as Morrison's men gave chase on horseback. The narrow canyon that had concealed the rustlers' operation now became a trap that limited their escape options. Can we outrun them? Sarah called out as thunder stretched into a full gallop. Not in the open country beyond the canyon.
we need to find another way.
Joseph led them up a steep trail that branched off from the main canyon, following a path that seemed to lead nowhere but higher into the mountains. Sarah trusted his judgment completely, focusing all her energy on staying in the saddle as her horse scrambled up the treacherous slope. The pursuit continued for hours as they climbed higher into the Montana peaks, following game trails and hidden paths that Joseph seemed to know instinctively. Gradually, the sounds of their pursuers faded as the difficult terrain took its toll on both horses and riders. As evening approached, they finally stopped in a protected alcove high above the tree line, their horses exhausted and their own strength nearly spent. From their vantage point, they could see the lights of Willowbrook in the distance, looking impossibly far away and unreachable. "We cannot return directly," Joseph explained as they shared water and dried meat from his pack. "Morrison will have sent men to watch the main roads, and he will have already begun spreading his story about your involvement in the cattle thefts."
"What story?"
"That you used your knowledge of local ranches to help plan the raids. Your reputation for wild behavior will make many people ready to believe such accusations." Sarah felt sick at the thought of facing her father with such charges against her.
"Father will never believe I would do such a thing."
"Your father loves you, but he is also a judge who must consider evidence. Morrison will manufacture evidence to support his claims, and your presence at the Patterson Ranch yesterday could be twisted to suggest advanced scouting for the raid."
"Then, what can we do?"
Joseph stared out at the vast Montana landscape, his mind working through their limited options. "We must gather evidence that proves Morrison's guilt so thoroughly that his accusations against you become irrelevant."
"That means returning to the Hidden Valley and documenting everything we saw there."
"Return?
After they nearly killed us today? It is the only way. Morrison believes he has frightened us off permanently. He will not expect us to return, especially not immediately."
Sarah considered this plan with a mixture of terror and determination.
"How would we document what we saw? Our word alone will not be enough against a man of Morrison's standing.
We need physical evidence, documents, stolen cattle with identifiable brands, something that cannot be dismissed or explained away."
"The cattle brands," Sarah said suddenly. "Morrison can't alter all the brands on 300 head of cattle."
"If we could identify specific animals stolen from particular ranches, we would have proof of the thefts."
"Excellent thinking."
"Your knowledge of local ranch brands would be invaluable for such evidence gathering." They spent the remainder of the evening planning their return to the Hidden Valley, considering routes that would avoid detection and methods for documenting what they found there. As night fell, Sarah found herself studying Joseph's face in the firelight, wondering at the man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. "Mr. Crowfeather," she said quietly, "why are you risking your life to help me? You could simply ride away and let Morrison's accusations stand."
Joseph looked at her for a long moment before answering.
"Among my people, when we choose to guide someone, we become responsible for their well-being. I accepted that responsibility when I agreed to consider your father's proposal."
"Is that the only reason?"
"No," he admitted. "I see in you the same spirit that once drove me to rebel against injustice. The difference is that you have the chance to channel that spirit towards something meaningful from the beginning.
I will not let Morrison's greed destroy that opportunity."
Sarah felt her heart race at his words, sensing depths of meaning that neither of them was ready to fully acknowledge.
"And what happens after we expose Morrison? Will you still consider my father's proposal?" "That depends on what you want, Miss Mackenzie."
"Today you showed courage, intelligence, and quick thinking under pressure.
You also showed that you can follow instructions when lives depend on it."
"Perhaps the question is no longer whether I am willing to guide you, but whether you still need guidance."
"I don't understand." "You are becoming the person you were meant to be.
That person may not need anyone's permission or guidance to make her own way in the world." Sarah pondered this idea as she settled down for a few hours of rest.
Was it possible that her wild spirit, so long considered a liability, might actually be her greatest strength? Could she really become someone who made her own choices and followed her own path?
Tomorrow would bring new dangers as they attempted to gather the evidence needed to expose Morrison's crimes and clear her name. But, tonight, high in the Montana mountains with a Cherokee tracker who saw her potential rather than her problems, Sarah Mackenzie began to understand that her greatest adventure was just beginning. The stars wheeled overhead as she drifted into sleep, dreams filled with visions of a future where her wildness served a purpose greater than shocking the good people of Willowbrook. She dreamed of justice served and truth revealed, of trails followed and mysteries solved, of a life lived according to her own terms rather than others' expectations. Most importantly, she dreamed of dark eyes that saw her not as a problem to be solved, but as a force of nature to be respected and valued. In those dreams, the Cherokee tracker's guidance was transforming into something far deeper and more meaningful than either of them had anticipated. Dawn broke gray and cold in the high mountains as Sarah and Joseph prepared for their dangerous return to Morrison's hidden valley. They had spent the night planning their approach, studying every detail of the terrain and timing their descent to coincide with the rustlers' morning routine when most men would be busy with cattle management. Joseph had fashioned a crude but effective camera obscura from materials in his pack, a simple device that could capture images of the stolen cattle brands for evidence. Sarah had spent hours drawing detailed maps of the valley layout and listing every ranch brand she could remember, creating a comprehensive reference for identifying stolen stock. Remember, Joseph instructed as they began their careful descent toward the valley, we need clear documentation of at least a dozen different ranch brands on cattle in Morrison's possession. That will establish a pattern that cannot be explained as coincidence. And, if we're discovered again? This time we have a better escape route planned, and Morrison will not expect us to return so soon. His overconfidence may work in our favor. They approached the hidden valley from the opposite side this time, using a steep animal trail that Joseph had spotted during their hasty retreat the day before. The route was treacherous, requiring them to leave their horses nearly a mile away and proceed on foot through terrain that challenged even their considerable outdoor skills. From their new vantage point, they could observe the rustlers' morning activities without being seen. Morrison was again directing operations, organizing groups of men to drive various herds toward different locations. Sarah realized they were witnessing the distribution phase of the operation, stolen cattle being moved toward multiple routes for transportation to Canada. There, Sarah whispered, pointing toward a corral containing about 50 head of cattle. Those are definitely Patterson cattle, I can see his distinctive P-bar brand from here. And, next to them, those cattle with the double R brand belong to the Reynolds Ranch. Joseph carefully documented each identification with his makeshift camera while Sarah recorded detailed notes about the brands, estimated numbers, and physical descriptions of specific animals. Their evidence was growing stronger with each observation. As they worked, they overheard a conversation that chilled Sarah's blood. Morrison was speaking with two of his lieutenants about the next phase of their plan. The Mackenzie girl has seen too much, Morrison was saying. Even if she can't prove anything, her testimony could cause problems. We need to ensure she's discredited completely before she has a chance to speak. What did you have in mind, boss? Plant some of the stolen cattle on Mackenzie property. When they're discovered, it will confirm all our accusations about the girl's involvement. Judge Mackenzie will have no choice but to arrest his own daughter. Sarah felt sick at the calculated cruelty of Morrison's plan. Not only was he willing to frame her for his crimes, but he intended to destroy her father's reputation and position in the process. Joseph's jaw tightened as he listened to the conversation. We need more than evidence of stolen cattle now. We need proof of Morrison's direct involvement and his plan to frame you. How can we get that? His office in that main building probably contains records of the operation. If we could get inside. That's suicide. There are too many men around the building. Joseph studied the camp layout with professional intensity. Not necessarily. Most of the men are occupied with moving cattle. If we wait until the herds are driven out of the valley, the camp will be much less populated. They spent the next several hours documenting every aspect of the rustling operation they could observe from their hidden position. Sarah's knowledge of local ranch brands proved invaluable as she identified stolen cattle from at least 15 different properties across Montana territory. As the morning progressed, their patience was rewarded. Large groups of rustlers began driving herds of cattle out of the valley through various exits, leaving only a skeleton crew to guard the remaining stock and buildings. Morrison himself departed with one of the larger herds, apparently supervising the most valuable shipment personally.
Now, Joseph decided, we may not get another opportunity like this.
They worked their way down to the valley floor, using the same stealth techniques that had served them well as trackers.
The few remaining guards were focused on the cattle in the outer corrals, allowing Joseph and Sarah to approach the main building undetected.
The structure was larger than it had appeared from above, clearly serving as both living quarters and operational headquarters for the rustling enterprise.
Joseph picked the lock with tools from his kit while Sarah kept watch for approaching guards.
Inside, they found exactly what they needed: detailed records of cattle thefts going back more than 2 years. Morrison had kept meticulous accounts of stolen stock, sale prices, distribution of profits among his partners, and plans for future raids. Most damaging of all, they found the specific plan to frame Sarah for the crimes, complete with forged documents purporting to show payments to her for information about ranch security. He's been planning this for weeks, Sarah realized as she read through the fabricated evidence. Every detail is designed to make me appear guilty while protecting his real accomplices. Joseph gathered the most incriminating documents while Sarah continued searching through Morrison's files. Her persistence was rewarded when she discovered correspondence between Morrison and cattle buyers in Canada, proving the international scope of the operation and providing names of additional conspirators. "Joseph," she called softly, "look at this." She had found a detailed map marking every ranch in Montana Territory, with notes about herd sizes, security arrangements, and optimal times for raids. Her father's ranch was marked with a red X and the notation "Final Target, Personal Vendetta."
Morrison intends to destroy my family completely, Sarah realized.
This isn't just about money, it's personal revenge against my father for some reason.
Joseph studied the map and accompanying notes with growing alarm. We need to leave immediately.
This evidence is enough to convict Morrison, but only if we can get it to the territorial authorities alive. As they prepared to leave the building, the sound of approaching horses froze them in place. Morrison had returned unexpectedly, his voice carrying clearly as he gave orders to his men.
Search every building.
I know someone was here, the lock on my office has been tampered with.
Joseph and Sarah found themselves trapped in the building with no obvious escape route.
The windows were too small to climb through, and the only door led directly into the main area where Morrison's men were gathering. "The back corner," Joseph whispered, pointing toward a section of the building where the walls met at an odd angle. Buildings like this often have hidden spaces for storage.
His instincts proved correct. Behind a loose board panel, they discovered a narrow crawlspace that led under the building.
It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but it offered their only chance of escape. They crawled through the cramped space as boots thundered overhead and angry voices demanded answers about the missing documents.
The crawlspace seemed to extend forever, filled with cobwebs and the scurrying sounds of disturbed rodents.
Finally, they emerged behind the building, covered in dust but still alive and carrying the evidence that could expose Morrison's entire operation. However, their troubles were far from over. The rustler leader had posted guards around the perimeter of the camp, making escape from the valley much more difficult than their entry had been. "The old mining trail," Sarah whispered as they crouched behind a pile of equipment. "There's an abandoned mine shaft about half a mile from here with tunnels that connect to the other side of the canyon.
If we could reach it. Lead the way. You know this terrain better than anyone."
They made their way carefully toward the mine entrance, using every bit of cover the landscape provided. Sarah's lifetime of exploring Montana's wilderness served them well as she led Joseph along forgotten paths and through concealed gullies that kept them hidden from the searching rustlers. The mine entrance was partially concealed by fallen rocks, but they managed to squeeze through into the darkness beyond. Sarah had explored these tunnels as a child, despite her father's warnings about their dangers. Now that forbidden knowledge became their salvation as she guided Joseph through the underground passages toward an exit on the far side of the canyon. An hour of careful progress through the mine brought them to a shaft that led to the surface. They emerged blinking in the afternoon sunlight, still carrying the precious evidence but now with a clear path back to their horses and safety. "We did it," Sarah breathed, hardly believing they had succeeded in their impossible mission.
The first part, yes.
Now we must get this evidence to your father and the territorial marshal before Morrison realizes what we've taken." They rode hard toward Willowbrook, pushing their horses to cover ground quickly while remaining alert for signs of pursuit. As the familiar buildings of the town came into view, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had the evidence to clear her name and expose Morrison's crimes, but she knew the confrontation ahead would be difficult. Judge Mackenzie was in his study when they arrived, his face showing the strain of worrying about his daughter's disappearance.
"Sarah. Thank God you're safe."
Morrison came by this morning with the most terrible accusations. "Father, Morrison is the leader of the rustling operation."
"We have proof." Sarah quickly explained their discoveries while Joseph laid out the incriminating documents on the judge's desk.
Judge Mackenzie's expression transformed from confusion to anger as he absorbed the evidence of Morrison's betrayal.
"This is incredible.
James Morrison has been my friend for 20 years. To think he would commit such crimes and, then, try to frame my daughter." "The evidence is conclusive, Judge Mackenzie," Joseph stated. "Morrison has been stealing cattle across the territory for more than 2 years, using his legitimate ranch as cover for the operation."
"And the plan to frame Sarah?" "Detailed in his own handwriting. He intended to plant stolen cattle on your property and present forged documents showing payments to Sarah for information about ranch security." Judge Mackenzie rose from his chair, his face set with determination. "I'll send word to the territorial marshal immediately. Morrison must be arrested before he can flee to Canada with his Confederates."
As her father moved to summon the marshal, Sarah found herself alone with Joseph for the first time since their ordeal began. The Cherokee tracker studied her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. "Your courage, intelligence, and knowledge of this land made all the difference. Without you, Morrison would have succeeded in his plan. Without you, I never would have learned to see the truth in the first place.
You taught me that my wildness could serve a purpose."
Joseph stepped closer, his dark eyes reflecting emotions that neither of them had been ready to acknowledge during their dangerous mission. "Miss Mackenzie, Sarah, you no longer need anyone's guidance. You have found your own strength and purpose."
"Does that mean you're leaving?"
"It means the choice is yours. You could come with me when my work here is finished. There are many places in this territory where a person with your skills would be valued. Or you could stay here and build a new life where people see you as the hero who exposed Morrison rather than the wild girl who shocked them." Sarah felt her heart racing as she considered the choice before her. The safe option was to stay in Willowbrook, where she would now be respected and accepted. But the wild spirit that had always driven her toward new horizons was calling once again, offering adventures she could barely imagine. "Joseph," she said, using his first name for the first time, "I've spent my whole life being told who I should be. For the first time, I have the chance to discover who I want to become."
"And who is that?"
Sarah looked into his eyes and saw her future reflected there, a future of open trails and new challenges, of using her skills to help others and making her own way in the world. Most importantly, she saw a future with a man who valued her wildness rather than trying to tame it. "I want to be the woman who rides beside Joseph Crowfeather, tracking down injustice wherever we find it." The Cherokee tracker's stern expression softened into something approaching a smile.
"That woman would be welcome company on any trail."
As the sounds of approaching horsemen announced the arrival of the territorial marshal and his posse, Sarah Mackenzie realized that her greatest adventure was just beginning. She was no longer the wild girl who shocked Willowbrook, she was a woman who had found her purpose and the man who truly understood her spirit. The Cherokee tracker had indeed taken her as his own, not through conquest or taming, but through the deeper bond of two wild spirits choosing to run free together across the vast Montana landscape they both called home.